So that only takes you so far, because that's the aggregate at the metro level. And metros themselves are aggregates of different kinds of neighborhoods, ranging from downtown communities where residents may pay a high premium for condo-style living, but actually walk to work, to new exurban communities on the periphery, where residents are able to purchase homes at reasonable prices, but are compelled to buy, again, 2 or 3 cars. And it's also the nature, the characteristic of neighborhoods in which people live. Density, walkability, the availability and quality of transit service, convenient access or non-convenient access, as the case may be, to amenities such as grocery stores, dry cleaners, daycare, movie theaters, et cetera, et cetera. There's obviously a wide range within this metropolitan area. Not surprisingly, there's above average transportation burden in outlying areas of fast-growing, auto-dependent, low-density communities like Ray, Clinton, Platte, Lafayette, portions of Johnson, Cass, Miami. And there are specific neighborhoods that the studies are beginning to identify with both high transportation and high housing cost burdens. Excelsior Springs in Clay County, Lone Jack in Jackson County, Grain Valley in Jackson County, Childs in Miami County. The bottom line is we're able now, really with a sophistication of mapping capabilities and new technologies that have been introduced in the research community, to basically compare and contrast housing and transportation costs across metropolitan areas, within metropolitan areas, across many income levels and racial and ethnic levels. And it basically, I think, points out the need to talk about these issues in unison, in an integrated, unified way, because that's how all of us live our lives. Now let's turn to the reasons for this harsh reality, because I think that really sets up what we need to do about it nationally and perhaps here as well. Why are transportation costs outstripping the cost of housing for so many working families in this metropolitan area? The answer is obviously not going to be a surprise. Tim has talked about it. You stand out as being perhaps the most stretched out metropolis in the nation. The land area inside the Kansas City Freeway Loop is 2.5 times that of the Chicago Loop. The city of Kansas City, Missouri alone covers nearly 320 square miles. That is more than San Francisco, Boston, Detroit, which is a pretty big city, and Miami combined. At the metro level, you cover more land than Greater London, Greater Tokyo, Greater Los Angeles, and Greater Mumbai combined. At the metro level, you exceed the total area of the New York City region, which spans 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. You have the highest number of freeway lanes per capita, freeway lane miles per capita in the nation, including 8 federal highways and 49 state roads. More workers use a private vehicle to commute to work in Kansas City than any of the other top 28 metros that were studied. 93% use a private vehicle to get to work, only 2% use public transit, 2% walk or bike, and only 4% work from home, even though we all thought we'd all be working at home with the introduction of the internet. On average, each local resident travels around 29 miles a day. 29 miles a day in a vehicle. That's 36% more than the average for the 68 largest metro areas in the United States. Despite, and this is something that at Brookings we focus intensely on given demographic changes and economic restructuring, despite the incredible assets of your central cities. And I've come here probably 15 or 20 times in the past decade. And when people say, what's Kansas City like? I said, Kansas City is some of the best urban bones in the United States. Historic architecture, I mean, really distinctive, special, livable neighborhoods. Despite all those things, the centralization, dispersal of economic and residential life obviously dominates the physical landscape here. During the 1990s, the city of Kansas City grew by about 6,400 people. The metro area grew by about 12%, about 193,000 people. So the population rebound in Kansas City, Missouri, was only 3% of the region's total population growth. Where did it go? Not surprising again, Johnson County, 27%, 96,000 people. Clay, 20%. Cass County, 29%. Platte, 27%. Platte adding more people, 16,000 in the city of Kansas City. The same trends are basically happening in this decade. The metro area grew about 4% overall since 2000. That's actually not that bad nationally. Cass is leading the way with about 13.6% increase in residents. Johnson, Platte, Clay continuing to experience larger than average growth rates. Jackson lost 1% of its population. Wyandotte lost 2.4%. Less than 3,500 new residents moved into Kansas City, Missouri, while over 2,650 moved out of Kansas City, Kansas. And the trends are actually similar in many of the inner ring suburbs. 12 of the 17 first suburban jurisdictions actually lost population between 2000 and 2005. Now, as people go, so do jobs. That's a cliche. It's actually true. You are one of the most decentralized population areas in the United States, and therefore one of the most decentralized employment regions. As Tim said, less than 14% of the jobs are located within 3 miles of where we sit today. And that ranks the region about 73rd out of 88, and less than 43% are located within 10 miles of the CBD, and that ranks you 76th out of 88. Now, the spreading out of the metro area, again, this is all just common sense, affects the travel patterns of households in the region. As you spread out with low density settlement dominating, with suburbs growing in a disjointed way, where residential, separate from office, separate from commercial, families are completely dependent on the car. Vehicle miles traveled in this region grew by about 26% in the 1990s. That's more than double the 12% population growth. Now, there's another issue here. And to be frank, it's no different than it is in Atlanta. It's no different than it is in many of the Midwestern regions. In some ways, it's better here than Detroit, Cleveland, or Pittsburgh. And that is the concentration of poverty and minority residents in the core. We did a report on Missouri back in 2002, and what we basically said, and I'll quote, Metro Kansas City continues to grow in spatially divided ways. Wealth and opportunity accumulating in many rings of suburbs, while slow growth minority residents and lower income households accumulate in the center. About 87% of African Americans live in Jackson and Wyandotte County. Over 80% live in the cities alone. You're the 30th most racially segregated of our country's 272 metropolitan areas. And you know, I talk about this because they have profound influence on metropolitan growth patterns. We used to talk about racial and ethnic segregation as an equity issue. It's really almost a fairness issue. What you need to think about is the relationship of those patterns and the transportation and housing costs that I talked about earlier. When low-income families and minority families live bunched up together in one part of a metropolitan area, it has a whole cascade of effects on the rest of the metro. First, not surprisingly, many working poor get concentrated in a particular part of the metro, usually far away from good schools and quality jobs. Second, the imbalance between housing and jobs worsens traffic congestion. Third, it places enormous stress on the region's employers by limiting the pool of workers who can live within a reasonable commuting distance. And here's the real question. Affordable housing concentration, racial and ethnic separation, it forces leapfrog development. Moderate income families, particularly white families, usually don't want to live in what they consider to be distressed areas of the region, and they can't afford to live in high-priced areas. So they move further and further and further out in the sort of great game of leapfrog. That is what's leading, essentially, to this disconnect between housing and transportation costs.